Welcome to Jumpstart, secure, fast cloud recovery from cyber attacks. So my name is James Watts. I'm the Managing Director from Databarracks. I'm going to be talking today about a service that we launched just last year. We'll do a very quick summary of what we're going to go through and then really get into the detail of what Jumpstart is all about. So Jumpstart, we say it's secure recovery infrastructure on demand. It's a pre-prepared cloud-based recovery landing zone, and then we use infrastructure as code to deploy all of the resources, networking, security to be activated in minutes to get ready and prepare for respond to a cyber incident. Now, there's a lot of detail in there. There's probably a little bit of jargon, so we're going to work through and talk about why we think this is such an interesting and innovative solution. If you're playing buzzword bingo on webinars today, I think I'm probably going to say innovative quite a few times, so kind of watch out for that one as we go through. But I'm pleased to say we think it's really exciting, but obviously we would, and we're not the only ones. So we launched the service in 2023, and then only a couple of months ago we were really pleased to win the Computing Cloud Excellence Award for Cloud Disaster Recovery and Continuity Product of the Year. And there's, if you know, for customers on this webinar this afternoon, that's Chris and Claudia from our service management team. People hopefully you'll know well, and you can see how I think their smile was reflective of how we all felt picking up that award. So really exciting. The kind of housekeeping for this afternoon, we're scheduled for 30 minutes. That does include a bit of time for Q&A. If you have any questions, you can type them in on the panel on the right hand side. It's just myself here today, so if I see the question as I'm kind of working through and I'm able to answer, I'll try to do so at the time. If not, I'll make sure that we come back to it at the end. And then if there's anything that any questions that you might have that perhaps I can't answer, if there's something that's very technical or kind of not for today, then pop it in anyway. We'll make sure we always go through all of the questions and make sure we can get back to everyone individually. And then first question as always, slides and video. Yes, we are recording today. We'll distribute all of these afterwards. So if there's anything that you kind of see that's particularly of interest, you'll be able to grab that after the fact. And so what are we going to talk about? So I'm not just going to run through the specifics of the service itself, but also I want to go through the rationale that we had of why we built it. We were facing a number of challenges in recovering our customers from ransomware incidents, and needed a better way to do it. So we're going to walk through a couple of those incidents and those case studies, run through how all this works, and then answer any questions that you might have. And then the last bit of preamble before we get to running through it, there's a couple of things that I really wanted to share because we're kind of coming to the end of this year, and 2024 has been a pretty monumental year for us at Databarracks. We've had lots of big interesting things happen. We actually acquired 2 businesses this year. So the first of which was Plan B Consulting, who we acquired in May. And I should say we've got a bit of a mix of attendees on the webinar today. So we have some people who are very much technologists, and we have some folks from the risk and resilience side. So if you're in risk and continuity and resilience, you'll definitely know Plan B. Really well respected consultancy, have been around for sort of 15+ years, based in Glasgow. Real experts on kind of everything BC crisis management. And they do all of those services, but perhaps the thing that's maybe most interesting for everyone on the session today is they're one of the few NCSC certified cyber incident exercising partners. So they're able to provide cyber incident exercises, exactly the things that we're talking about today, that's been certified by the National Cybersecurity Centre. And then only last month we acquired a technology business called Cool Spirit, based up in Chesterfield, and Cool Spirit provide infrastructure, cyber security, and data protection. So very much like Databarracks, also a partner with Commvault, the largest solution provider for Commvault in the UK. Databarracks, the largest managed service provider. So in both of these businesses, in kind of bringing them into Databarracks, we've added a lot of really good expertise and capability. So lots of kind of exciting things that we're able to offer now, and hopefully some more that we'll develop and build out as the months pass. So starting here. So what's the problem that we are trying to solve with Jumpstart? And on the face of it, obviously we're talking about how do you recover from a cyber incident and how do you recover into the public cloud. But actually it's a kind of, although that's a relatively modern challenge, the overall problem is something that we've all been aware of and dealing with for a long time. And that's this cold, warm and hot recovery site distinction. So I guess we've all been making that decision in the past about how we do our recovery. So cold recovery site, that's the image kind of bottom left, the very kind of clean, very pristine, empty data center. That's a site where you've got a location, but you've got zero or kind of very little infrastructure ready to go. A warm recovery site. This is a place where that's the kind of photo in the middle with the handsome man in dungarees looking at patch cables. You've got some infrastructure at a site. Perhaps you've got networking, perhaps you've got some servers, but the data isn't up to date. It's not replicated. It's not ready to go. And then big image on the right hand side, a hot recovery site. So you've got all of the infrastructure ready to go, data's replicated, and you're able to switch over almost instantly. And it's probably worth noting here, when we used to talk about these things, it wasn't just kind of just about the IT recovery. We were also thinking about our people. So usually this would also come along with kind of bums on seats, desktops, monitors, all the things that you need for someone to work with. But I guess we've breezed past the kind of lockdowns and the kind of post-COVID world and the remote working that is the default that everyone has now switched to. But of course, we still need a place to recover the IT infrastructure to. And I want to do a quick kind of blast through well, the last kind of 25 years, so from the sort of turn of the century of the technology timeline and the kinds of recovery sites that were preferred at each of those points. So if we go back to the early noughties, so to sort of 2000s, very, very few organizations had what we would call real, true disaster recovery. And by that, I mean replicated data, up to date, ready to go. It just simply wasn't possible for most people. The bandwidth wasn't available. If it was available, it was eye-wateringly expensive. And it wasn't only the bandwidth that was the expense. There was also the cost of infrastructure. You would need a kind of an exact replica of all of your hardware. So you were kind of doubling up on your infrastructure costs, your networking costs, adding on that enormous bandwidth cost. It was limited to the few at this point. Now, a couple of trends obviously we've seen over over this period since then. Bandwidth obviously has dropped incredibly. Storage costs have come down. Chip costs have come down. All of that has been kind of overall trends. But the first sort of big technological revolution that happened that really started to influence disaster recovery was server virtualization. So I picked a bit of an arbitrary date here in sort of 2005, when that was when I think we really started to see VMware turning up in most folks' data centers. And virtualization obviously has lots of benefits on your production environment, but it has a big benefit for us in disaster recovery, because you no longer need to have an exact replica of all of that hardware. You can run something much smaller, something lower cost. You could be doing physical to virtual replication, and you've got a secondary setup that will run a skeleton staff at a much lower cost. Now, the next kind of revolution that happened is coming into the 2010s. Obviously, cloud computing really sort of kicked off at this point, and that accelerated that trend even further. So now, not only did you not have to have identical hardware, but you didn't need to own that hardware. You could have a cloud provider who owned all of that disaster recovery infrastructure, could share out that cost amongst all of those customers, again bringing the cost down. And as in any market, whenever you see the cost of a product or service coming down so significantly, it changes things drastically, and suddenly adoption kind of really took off. And that's the point where we would say, probably in the sort of mid-2010s, disaster recovery really became democratized. And that's not to say that absolutely everyone had true kind of hot DR sites, but it was definitely within reach of the many at that point rather than the few. And certainly for us as Databarracks, so we have backup as a service, we have disaster recovery as a service. These were services that we were offering at the time. And by a long, long way, disaster recovery was far more popular at that period, because suddenly organizations went from a place where they'd be, IT would be going back to the business and saying, we can go from a recovery time objective of perhaps 2 days to a week to 4 hours. And so that was really exciting. Everyone was really keen for it, and everyone took that kind of pot of IT resilience budget and really pushed it into DR, into high availability. In some cases, put all of their eggs in that high availability basket and really kind of neglected longer term recovery. And that was good at the time, but then obviously the big change that we saw throughout the 2010s was the enormous increase in cyber. And ransomware really revealed the weakness in that as the strategy. If you're replicating from a production environment to a secondary environment, you're obviously bringing with you any issue that's there on production, the breach, the malware, the ransomware, etc. And replication technology does give you the ability to revert back. You can go back to a previous version, something earlier, but it was a pretty limited window. The reason that most people were replicating their data to a secondary site, and these would be geographically disparate sites, you were doing this because you wanted to protect yourself in the event of a physical issue. Perhaps you had a power outage, maybe it was a fire or a flood. And in those instances, you would always want to revert to the most recent copy of data you had. You want to minimize data loss. If you had a replication that was minutes before, that's the version that you wanted to go to. That wasn't the case when we were recovering from ransomware. You needed to go to the earliest clean version, and that clean version could have been several days, in some cases weeks or even months. And so the solution that we then came up with to solution to this problem was Jumpstart. So it's using backup and public cloud landing zones to recover from a ransomware incident in the cloud. And so I want to run through 2 examples of recoveries we did for customers in 2021 that really were kind of the catalyst of us looking at how we could solve this problem differently. You might remember 2021. It was the year when suddenly there was a huge upsurge in ransomware attacks on industrial manufacturing businesses. I think it became pretty clear that they were organizations that you were able to breach, and the very, very high cost of downtime that they all faced meant that they were much more likely to pay a ransom. And we had more than a few customers who were affected. The first customer had both backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service with us, but the ransomware wasn't detected fast enough and did outlast their recovery window with disaster recovery. So we needed to recover them from backup. And I should say here, that isn't always the case. We do lots and lots of recoveries from disaster recovery, from a replica. If you can, if the ransomware has been detected quickly, it's far, far better. It's much quicker, it's much easier. It's definitely preferred, but it isn't always the case. And as in this case, it was not. The second customer had a very similar situation. This was a much larger manufacturing company. They were multinational. They had sites all over the world, and they did have a plan of how they would respond to a cyber incident. And their plan said that they would recover their data back to their production data center. They wouldn't revert to a secondary data center. And on the face of it, that makes sense. As I mentioned, the reason that you have the secondary data center is in case there is something that physically that would affect that primary data center. There's nothing wrong. There's been no damage to the infrastructure, to the servers if you've had a cyber attack. The problem they then faced was that actually they weren't able to recover onto those systems because they had been quarantined by the forensic investigators who were kind of working through in the response to the cyber incident. So they reverted to their plan B in this case, and said, right, we'll buy in some hardware, we'll kind of rack it, and then we'll recover onto that. And then very quickly found that they couldn't do that. Unsurprisingly, as is the case for most organizations, they didn't have enough capacity in their data center to do that. I mean, that's pretty common. Most people don't run at lower than 50% capacity in their data centers. So the answer in both of these instances was that we did a recovery for them from their backups in Microsoft Azure to Azure. And when you're doing that recovery, you then have the challenge becomes how quickly can we get that environment provisioned and ready to go, ready to have the data recovered onto. And that then is the fundamental problem that we were trying to address with Jumpstart. So coming back to this cold, hot, and warm site distinction. So everything we do certainly everything we do in resilience, but also everything we do in IT or in business in general, there's always a trade-off between cost and something. It's cost and risk, or it's cost and performance. So cold sites, terrific. They are low in cost, but they're slow. Hot sites, very fast, but very expensive. Warm sites, somewhere in the middle. And just to give a kind of a very sort of rough and ready idea of the sorts of times we're talking about here, recovery at a hot site, really you're talking about somewhere between minutes and hours. Don't trust when people say anything's instant. It's never instant, but it's pretty fast to do that. By the time you've actually mobilized and committed to the recovery, you're failed over very, very quickly. From a warm site, it's the region of hours or days, and a cold recovery is at a minimum days, but potentially even up to weeks. Certainly in the case of recovering from a cyber incident, we would definitely say that's typically runs into weeks. And so this would normally be the kind of slide that probably you'd have at the start of one of these webinars or kind of presentation introducing a business. But the reason I've kind of brought it here is it informs how we then approached trying to address this situation. So I've kind of mentioned already, we have disaster recovery, which is replication. We have backup, which is backup. We have a team who do business resilience and business continuity. So all of the sort of non-technical elements, so creating plans, exercises, crisis management, all of those elements. And then the kind of least well-known part of what we do is we've got actually a really talented public cloud services team. We've always been really, really big on the public cloud. We were one of the first AWS partners in the UK. We moved all of our own infrastructure into the cloud. We moved our backup and recovery environments into the cloud. We've been all for it. And the thing that our public cloud team do for the most part is they're either migrating businesses into the public cloud or creating a good environment from a greenfield site. So that's resilience, but it's also making things secure, making sure it performs properly, making sure you're getting good value for money. And so that was how we looked at trying to address this problem. We took the things that our public cloud services team do for kind of setting someone up in the public cloud, and doing that for a disaster, how quickly we could recover. And that brings us to Jumpstart. So that summary again, this was the kind of slide I threw up at the start of the session, but just to kind of run through that again, because obviously it's pretty dense in terms of detail. So we call it recovery infrastructure on demand, deploying a pre-prepared landing zone. Some people, pedants, get offended because we say pre-prepared, because everything's pre-prepared, but really, we're talking about something that you've done ahead of time to save time in the incident. And then using infrastructure as code, you're getting that environment all up and running. And I'm going to come back to infrastructure as code in a second and go into perhaps the detail on that part. The benefits of this is, firstly, it's that big benefit of the cloud. I don't know if this is the case for everyone else, but certainly I feel like whenever I look at LinkedIn now, and perhaps it's the people that I'm connected with, there's a lot of cloud repatriation talk. There's a lot of businesses who are looking at moving things back out of the cloud because they can save money, and there's always a case for that. But for me, one of the kind of perfect use cases for the cloud is recovery. It's anything that isn't permanent, anything that you're spinning up. If you've got cyclical demand for it, it's just absolutely the best use case for the cloud for keeping costs low. You've got a faster recovery. You've got the backup environment and the recovery environment in the same place, and then it's secure. So the terms that we all use a lot in kind of our world at the moment are isolated, immutable, segregated. And this is, as segregated as you possibly can be, only deploying this at the time of the incident. And so here's I think I had on the first slide, in inverted commas, a kind of demo. This is kind of close to a demo as perhaps I can show on the session today. But this is a kind of typical business on the left-hand side. So everyone, certainly everyone that we work with, is operating a hybrid environment to some degree. You've got your data centers down at the bottom, your infrastructure as a service clouds at the top, Amazon, AWS, Google, in some mix. Your productivity suites, so your SaaS products, everything else, and all of that data, we back that up. We back it up typically to Azure. Can back it up to a number of places. Could go into data centers, into any of the other clouds, but into Azure typically. And then when a cyber incident occurs, we spin up that recovery landing zone, and it's an isolated air-gapped environment, and then we carry out this orchestrated recovery. So starting to recover all of those machines, and then, sorry, I'll click through. Hold on. The what you get from this is rapid in-cloud recovery, and then most importantly, you've got a recovery that is completely segregated in terms of people, process, and technology. Typically, when we talk about segregation, more often than not, we're talking about technology segregation. But actually, and this is, this really is the case. We've had this with customers who've had incidents. If you don't get the people segregation and have this completely separate, so that you avoid the opportunity to kind of leapfrog into a recovery environment, then you can really come proper. So I mentioned I would come back to this, and the reason I want to do a quick run through this is, as I mentioned, we've got a mix of people on this webinar. Some very much technologists, some in kind of the risk and resilience world. For the technology folks, bear with me. This is going to be kind of simple, a very simple explanation. But for everyone else, it's kind of quite critical to get a sense of how this service works. So if you were perhaps 10 years ago and you needed to buy some hardware for your data center, you'd get on the phone to your supplier, you'd order a server or a firewall, and you'd get it shipped to your site, you'd unbox it, rack it, or kind of all of those things, and that would take between days or kind of weeks. One of the kind of big selling points of the cloud was that, wow, isn't this is kind of immediate, and everything's at your fingertips, it's really, really quick. And so absolutely the case. You can do that. You can spin up a server instance. You can set a firewall really, really quickly. And if you're what I would call a basic cloud user, and I don't mean that to be pejorative, I'm definitely a kind of basic cloud user in this case. This is how I would do it. You do it through the portal. You do it through the console. So we've got the AWS console on the left, the Azure console on the right. And so you'd click in. I need some storage. I need a server instance, a database service. Click, 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 and kind of spin it up. And much, much faster than where we were with traditional data centers, but still fairly manual and not particularly scalable, particularly if you've got a very large environment. Certainly lots of opportunity for variance, we'll say. So the alternative is all of those things could be defined as code. So writing exactly what you want those resources to be, writing where they should be hosted, writing all of that information, all of that detail, and standardizing all of that deployment. And again, a bit like we said with virtualization earlier, lots and lots of benefits of infrastructure as code for kind of all sorts of people. But for us in kind of the R world, the big selling point here is that you can repeatably and securely do something over and over again very, very quickly. So we can spin up an environment, we can do a recovery for a test or for anger, and then delete it all down when we're done, and then repeat it again, do it again next quarter. That, I think, probably for so many organizations, finding the time to actually do disaster recovery testing is one of the big challenges. Either it's kind of done once a year in the run up to an audit, or it's not done. It's hard to find that time. If you can make that process easier and simpler, not only can you do it more easily, but you can then start to do it more frequently. And so to come back to that cold, warm, and hot site distinction, what we're using here is kind of the innovation in the public cloud to try and provide the benefits of a warm site, but at the cost of a cold site. And the benefits are beyond just cost. So as I mentioned, the reason we developed this service originally was it was cyber. We were the kinds of incidents we're trying to recover from are cyber incidents, and we know, I think perhaps as I've mentioned, all attackers, particularly in a ransomware incident, will not only attempt to breach and encrypt the production environment, they will also attempt to do so on any backups and any secondary environment. And they know, because if they're able to do that, there's really no option other than to pay the ransom. So the kind of the exciting thing about this service is there is no secondary environment to be breached. It is only spun up and turned on at the time of recovery. So when we talk about kind of isolation, segregation, it's kind of about as segregated as anything kind of ever could be, and it's also very quickly repeatable. So if you have been breached, if your forensic team need an environment to work on, can spin that up. If they need multiple versions, can spin up multiple versions of the infrastructure. Now, there's a cost implication of that. You're running multiple instances in the cloud, but as we know, at the point of incident, anything that you can run concurrently to speed up that time from kind of point of incident to BAU, to getting the business back up and running, is kind of preferable, and it's exactly what what everyone wants to do. So to summarize kind of all of the above, Jumpstart is taking the best attributes of cloud computing to make recovery from ransomware faster, a lower cost, and more secure. And it's that combination of kind of best of cold and warm sites. And so I'll finish there with a couple of big beaming Cheshire grins again, and then hopefully, depending on where we are for time, we have a little bit of time for questions. So bear with me. Let me see if I can run through. Right, so quite a long question here. I'll see if I can answer through. Once a company has invoked Jumpstart, how easy is it to move back to normal operational environment once it's cleaned up? What would be the challenges of switching back? Yes, okay. Yeah, good question. So this always tends to be the thing that people forget about, actually. It's one thing to do the failover. The failback sometimes can be more difficult. I mean, in this case, actually, it's probably less difficult. So I should mention, actually, I haven't really talked an enormous amount about the technology that we built the service on. So this is built predominantly on Commvault backup software, and one of the reasons that we're able to do this, that it does really well. It's kind of one of the sort of less well publicized features, but for us it's kind of so critical and so important, is that you can do a recovery from one environment to a very different environment. So you can go VMware to Hyper-V, you can go Hyper-V into Azure or AWS, and you can kind of come back. And it's that flexibility that means you can recover somewhere else, and it'll do conversion. So the recovery to switch back is ultimately it's kind of the same process that we would go through for the recovery in anger. I mean, when we do the fail back, the benefit that you have is that you're not up against it in terms of time. You can plan it, you can decide when you want to do it, you can make sure you've got enough staff available who aren't on holiday. The only implication you have is how long you want to run in the cloud in DR. We've had we've had customers who to give an exact example on this, we had a customer that we failed over into the cloud, but their production environment was coming to end of life, so they used that opportunity to move data center, to upgrade all of their hardware, and then fail back into a different data center. So it's a much easier process because it's it's done with a lot less stress, but certainly not a difficult difficult challenge. Right, another question. We have hundreds of terabytes of live data and terabytes a week. This could be unaffordable. I mean, unaffordable perhaps is it's a relative term. Perhaps we'll take a look at this and see if we can find a price. I mean, the for us the really big benefit of this service is actually it's about as inexpensive a service for this level of recovery as certainly as we've ever been able to offer. There's, you know, you can kind of make it's running from backup software, so you get the benefits of kind of compression and dedupe. So the kind of in terms of data volume, that comes down a lot. Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, certainly it is a thing that we do for lots of customers at kind of that level. It's you know, by no means sort of uncommon, but in terms of affordability, certainly we can kind of take a look and offer an alternative on that. Okay, next question. So question, is this the same as clean room? So good question. So if everyone is aware of Commvault software, Commvault launched a feature called Clean Room, which is on the face of it pretty similar. Actually done after we launched Jumpstart, although they're talking about it a lot at the moment because they've just launched it at the AWS event, because they've now got functionality for AWS. Slightly different in that their Clean Room is kind of based around what used to be called Metallic, which is the kind of Commvault Cloud SaaS product. Ours is based around the kind of core Commvault product. So there's a bit more flexibility in it, and I think Clean Room focused a bit more purely on testing, whereas in this case we're looking at both testing and actual recovery in a real invocation. So yes, similar approach, and yeah, because it's, I guess, to come back to the sort of how we built it and what it's built for. It's, you know, we think it's an innovative approach, but actually the things that we're doing aren't really innovative in any way, because you know, on one hand it's backup and then recovery into the cloud, and on the other hand it's something that, you know, that we have been doing separately for recovery landing zones and getting landing zones set up in the public cloud. It's kind of bringing things together that are already in existence, but to try and solve this problem. So one last question here. How do you validate that the backup is free from malicious software caused the original cyber incident? Yes, okay, very good question. So 2 points on this. There's on one hand, there are some features in the software to enable us to check, but also secondly, we don't always trust that. There's and I think this kind of speaks to a kind of wider trend in data protection. There's, I think, any data protection product, you know, a few years ago everything was you know, we'd call them a backup product. Now every technology, whether it's backup or replication, will talk about kind of cyber resilience, and there's been lots of kind of cyber features added on, so kind of detection features and kind of scanning and, you know, threat hunting, kind of all of those things. To me, they're all very much kind of bells and whistles on top of the core product. You know, it's good to have them, but typically you've probably got a product that's doing some kind of scan already, so it's you wouldn't rely on that in isolation to do the whole job for you. So even if we're able to check that, and even if the tools within the software available are able to tell us that it is free, we still recommend we do this as a sandbox recovery first. So you do that recovery. If you have been able to identify what the clean point was prior to infection, then terrific. You know, if the forensic team have been able to do that quickly, then it helps. If not, you know, you can do that recovery and then test on the environment. But yeah, certainly there are sometimes ways to get to that answer quickly, but we would always recommend caution and recommend doing a test and a check on it when it's recovered into the sandbox before switching over and going live. Hopefully that answers. Right, I'm sorry, I promised this would be 30 minutes and I've gone way over that. So I'm going to draw to an end now, but thank you so much for joining us. As it's that time of year, I'll do a really early December, wishing everyone a kind of Merry Christmas and Happy New Year period. And then hope we get to see everyone on a webinar again in the new year. Thanks so much.